Hello, beautiful people, and hello, beautiful Michelle Gray, the master of so many things. I've got a tandem healing that I want you to do for somebody, but
Okay.
talk about that later.
Okay.
Anyway, and hello, my dear Erik. I love you.
Hi, Mama. I love you so very much. And he had a great time in Norway with you. He was saying that last night too, but he
Yeah,
he loves the snow. He's talking about the snow. And
he
he
always
was
loved it.
actually, yeah, and he was sharing with me this morning about snowflakes. And we're going to talk about the patterns of the universe and everything today.
Oh,
But he was showing me how everything in creation is in the snowflakes and all the patterns. It's fascinating stuff. But yeah, he says he loves the snow.
that's right. He always has, and I do too.
Yeah,
Being in
yeah,
Texas, we don't get too much, but we
yeah.
people are going to talk about sacred geometry and also the concept of 369. You
Hmm.
can buy. Tesla said that if you understand the significance of the sequence 369, you will have the keys to the universe, the keys to
Yes.
manifestation. So I got this. As you can see, I've not started it yet because I don't know when I'm going to have the time. You can actually do exercises to manifest whatever you want. And I'm going to write, well, I don't have it now, but I forgot what I'm going to write. It was on a little post-it note, but I put it in the other room. Anyway, it's okay. All right, shall we start with
Eric says,
questions or
"Mom,
do you want to?
Mom, you need a." He says, "Mom, you need a post-it note for your post-it note."
I know I have lists of lists. All right, Erik, you
Okay.
want to just open up and start talking, or would you like to go straight to the questions that we have collected from community members?
Well, he says we can go into the questions, but what he wants to start with first is he says, guys, like this is he says these numbers shapes, he says it is all mathematical equations of creation, of God, of the universe. And so he says, listen up, make your notes, because he says all of what we're going to share today is to help amplify your life and to help you create on purpose, he says, on your purpose.
I like
So,
that. I like
yeah,
that.
we can get to the questions, he
Okay.
says.
Well, the first is the obvious one. What is sacred geometry? I understand that mathematics is the language of the universe, which means I
Mhm.
guess that it's also the language of source, God,
Yes,
or the
yes.
definition of, or defines God. I'm not sure. But it also is a way that we are all connected in this big mathematical grid, geometrical grid. But do you want to just start out with answering that question? What in the heck is sacred geometry and what's sacred about it anyway?
Well, he says, so, Mom, he goes, we're going to go all the way back in the beginning. And he's got like an echoing voice, like, in the beginning.
Beginning, beginning,
And
beginning.
exactly. And he's like showing a little point, a little spot. And he goes, let's call this little point spirit, God. He says that wants to know itself. And he says that point starts to move because it has to start to move to know itself. And then that point doubles itself. So he says, now we're looking at that point expanding to a circle, and then it doubles itself into another circle. And he says, what's important about this? He says, I want you to visualize everything, source, God, the beginning of creation, as a point expanding to a circle. He says that's growth in consciousness. Well, how does geometry fit into this? Because he says that circle then splits itself off to a second circle, an expansion. And he says, and when there is two, he's showing like a shape in the middle of three. So we've got this circle, you put them together, and you've got this other little piece in between. He says
Like
that's a
this,
shape.
kind of like a Venn
Yes,
diagram.
yes,
Okay.
exactly,
And then
exactly.
you can have more
So,
circles. It's like a spirograph, like the
yes,
kids play. All right, I
he
got you.
says, he says
And
that's to understand exactly. He says that's to understand what is creation. What is creation? What is God? That is creation. That is consciousness. And he says, and the shapes that are created are loaded with information.
Hmm.
He goes, think of it as codes. And he
Oh,
says, and light. So all of it carries information of existence. So he says, if we go back and think billions of years of existence and of these patterns unfolding over and over and over, he says there is information in the patterns. And so he says, like the triangle, he says there is a triangle, and the triangle, he says, holds power of substantiation, like he says, grounding, of safety. He says, if we go back to the pyramids, he's saying there was
yeah.
understanding of the power of the shapes, the pyramids. And he's even taking the triangle and flipping it upside down and saying it's creation because it's the womb. He says the
Oh,
baby coming out of the mother comes out into the womb. So he says, then once again, and he goes, hear us out, folks. He goes, once again, we flip that around and we create dimensional space with it. So he says, now we've got the triangle on the bottom of the pyramid and the
hmm,
triangle on the top. And he
right.
says,
And all the sides.
amplifying its power. But he says, here's the other thing, and he's going to slip in a little bit with the numbers, the power of the numbers. He says that original circle we were speaking of, the first circle, the second circle, and putting them together, he says, is the power of three. He goes, that could
Mm.
also be called the Holy Spirit. That could
Oh,
also be called the Trinity. He
mm.
says, the master number, three. And he says,
Mm.
there's many people that question. Oh, did we freeze? Oh, goodness. Oh,
Oh
there we
no,
go.
it's okay. I got you.
Okay. Okay. He says many people understand and relate to the number 3, 33, 33. And he says, we hear that as a master number. He says, well, what does that mean? He goes, well, it's part of creation. So everything that amplifies through experience all comes from these shapes. And he says, science understands it as molecules, as atoms. He
Mm.
says, but it's all the same. Do you see that thumbs up? That just Erik does that every time. He
What?
keeps there's a thumbs up that keeps popping up
Oh
every time
really?
I've connected with you.
Oh
Yes,
my God,
yes.
really?
Um, so he says, what is sacred geometry? It is the continuation of growth. So they are the shapes and the numbers that make up frequency, vibration. He goes, we could also translate it to music as well,
Mm.
because it's all built on the same process.
Oh.
He's
So
like,
three,
does
six,
that,
nine,
hmm,
three sides of a triangle, six sides of two triangles, nine. So is that where it gets its 369 gets its power of manifestation? Can you go into that?
yes, yes, because he says it's amplification. So
Oh.
you're amplifying. So he says, so going down to the basics, and he says, why I wanted to start with explaining the point to the expansion. He says, why we went to that is to understand that creation continues to grow, consciousness continues to grow, and it amplifies with power.
Mm.
So he says, if you relate that to the numbers, if you understand what the numbers mean, it is the amplification of creation. And he's going to add one more thing in. He says, think of two people when they come together with the same intent. When two people come together with the same intent, they're able to create an idea. It amplifies the idea.
Yeah.
So if you look at one person, the second person, and the idea as number three. So
Oh.
number three would be the creation.
Mm.
So he says, use that same concept in your manifestation. He says, you're bringing the power of two together and creating the third, the manifestation. So he says, everything is in a pattern. So all of these numbers, so the number 369 is the he says, in the power, the flower of life. It
Mm.
is in creation. He
Yeah.
says, everything is creation. Snowflakes, snails. He says, think of the geometry that's in absolutely everything, but it all starts from those points of the number three,
Yeah.
the divine third.
This is one
Yes.
of the symbols that's in this book. Kind of interesting.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, who would have thought God is math? So if you
Well, he
hate
says,
math people, you're in big trouble. He's going to smite your ass. Or is
well, he says, and
it?
the thing is he goes, many people would say, well, it's just a symbol, it's just a symbol. And he goes, and of course our belief goes along with the symbol as well, but he goes,
Yeah.
to enhance your belief, to say, well, I'm doing this, like he's showing, like I'm writing 369. I do my affirmation 3 times in the morning. He goes 6 times in the afternoon, and he says 9 times at night. But if that understanding isn't there, it can be difficult to bridge that belief system that that's
Yeah.
actually going to do something. But
Yeah.
he says, but when we go back to understand that that is creation itself, he says that is the formula itself of everything in existence.
Yeah.
And he says, so when we boil it right down to those numbers and we amplify it with our emotion, we amplify it with our belief, he says magic takes place.
And that's part of manifestation where you feel you already have it and you smell it and you taste it and you just know it's there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's maybe what bridges belief wise.
Yes. And he says, because he says, Mom, everything in existence, absolutely everything in existence is connected. There is nothing in this universe that is not connected.
Yeah.
So everything is connected. And this is how we understand that everything is as one. So even if there is a feeling of separation, nothing can be separated.
It
It is
distills back to
all,
that one point,
yes,
Eddie. So you have to
yes,
live as if you already have everything that you want,
yes,
every reality, whatever reality you seek.
yes.
All right. Well, how does sacred geometry affect anything? Did we answer that already?
Well, he says, how does it affect? Well, so if we go back to amplification and we think about the Egyptians, he says the ancient Egypt, they understood the connection. So he says, he's showing like a light at the top of the pyramid, and going inside the pyramid, there would be ceremonies or things that they would do that would amplify the energy. And he shows healing like
Okay.
inside and using healing. He's also saying in Atlantis, like understanding the power of healing with crystals and with shapes. He's showing not always being in a circle, but being in a triangle. And he says in that circle, like we wear on our finger for a wedding ring, he goes, so how many people wear a ring on their finger and identify longevity, eternity,
Yeah.
always together? So he says anytime we use a shape or put things in shapes, he says there's an amplification to it. So that nature shows us infinite nature, and he's showing the snail. So the snail
Hmm.
spiral, everything
Oh,
shows
yeah.
us infinite if we're willing to look at it, because right down to the cells in our body, because the cells in our body are made up the same way. So we ourselves are walking geometry.
Yeah. The
He says,
microtubules and all that. Yes,
yes.
absolutely.
He says like even the shape of our face. He
Right.
says the circle, he says the triangle. The
Yeah.
triangle from the nose to the eyes. He says everything is geometry.
Symmetry of
And he's
leaves, the symmetry of our arms
yes,
compared to our legs, all that.
yes,
Well,
yes,
crystals, do they get their power? Because really, on a microscopic level, there are all sorts of geometrical shapes in a crystal.
yes, yes.
And
And he says, and that's why
that's how
crystals have such,
Atlanteans
they're amplifiers.
okay, so is that how Atlanteans harnessed the power of the crystal to manifest things? Understanding the
Yes,
geometry within the crystal?
yes. He
Okay.
says they understood because not only did they use it to amplify, they used it as a source of communication as well. And he's actually showing speaking into the crystals. So being
Hello.
able to
Did you
deliver,
not pay
yeah,
the phone
like
bill? What the hell?
that's right. And he says all technology and future technology that we will experience all comes from this formula.
Look at
It all
DNA.
breaks down
It's a
this form.
special
Yes,
double helix. Um,
yes,
is consciousness built upon sacred geometry? And
yes.
so, can you explain that a little bit?
But he's going back to the point, and he's saying that point, for there to be light, that point has to understand itself. So he says, if we think about the circles as cycles of consciousness,
Hmm.
he says a cycle, a human being, source itself, had to expand to its limits, had to get to the limits to be able to multiply itself. So he says how we grow in consciousness is actually in circles. It
Oh,
goes in circles. That's why we have cycles, he says, why we have 4 seasons. Everything comes in cycles. He says the moon, the sun. He says
yeah.
everything as above, so below. So when we are growing consciously, he says we are expanding and multiplying the circle. So we are expanding into new space because we have pushed the outer limits of the circle that we have created for ourselves.
Is it true that our human life ordinarily has uh, phases that consist of 7 years? And I can see that in my own life from 0 to 7, and then from 7 to 14. Something is there any truth to that?
Yes. Yes, he says he's talking about the development of the cells, and he's saying that like we are reborn, like brand new cellular structure
Yeah.
every 7 years.
Oh, okay.
So he says, so we can also see that in the patterns of our life. And I'll just tell you, one of the most important things I've learned on my own journey is understanding and reading the patterns,
Hmm.
because you can really see the like Erik is saying, the year patterns, so you can see for yourself. And he says even though we all have this 7 year new structure, he says we don't all follow that, because not all of us, he says, depending on where we are, we might be holding on to certain things that are from, so we may not realize that that's happening. So he says that's where we start to get ill,
Oh,
is
wow.
when we're holding on to that old structure and
Instead
we're
of
in
just
a new
letting it rebirth
expansion.
to the next
Right.
7 years.
And he says
7 year
that's
itch.
where the mental state gets in and blocks that
Right.
experience.
Right. And then there's the 7 year itch. What about
Yeah.
tones? Like Eric has guided me to pick certain tones for the scalar field, like the 528, the
Mm-hmm.
4096, the
Mm-hmm.
4225. How does that relate to sacred geometry? Does that do something to the geometrical grid, that's in my scalar field?
Yes, because within all of the shapes is vibration, because
Okay.
everything goes down to vibration. So he
Yeah.
says by using the tones, you are directly tapping into the cellular structure, the vibration
Hmm.
of whatever the circumstances or whatever the molecule or body part or organ. Everything
Yeah.
goes down to a vibrational code. And so he says, what you're doing, mom, is when we have a tone that is set for somebody, he says it's like setting an instrument. It's like saying, this is where we're headed. And we start to, he says, gyrate the molecules.
Hmm.
They start to move to prepare for acceptance of this new code.
Wow. So instead of zeros and ones, the real deal for manifesting the real wonderful, awesome language is geometrical shapes, I guess.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
If we call upon Archangel Metatron, can he place a sacred geometry grid around us? And if so, how does that protect us?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay, so what he's showing me with Metatron is he's actually showing me the Metatron's cube. So he's
Yeah.
starting to pull this out. So he's showing me a diagram of the body, and then he's pulling this cube forward and he's rotating it, like, see, it's like here we see it as one, and then he's turning it out and making it 3 dimensional and keeps pulling it out. So he says what Metatron does is he's able to, he says, join, he says, from top to below. So he's taking the top of the body, the bottom of the body, and joining them together. He says, think of um, joining your higher self with your physical self. He says it's like it is protection because you're strengthening your natural structure. You're strengthening it and expanding it. But he says, for us to experience the benefit of that, we have to also be working hand in hand in our own growth,
Yeah.
because he says it's part of it has to do with our awareness to allow that process to happen in the way that we're speaking.
So there's Metatron.
Yeah,
You would get
right.
circles and triangles, basically. It's so
Mm-hmm.
cool. So pretty. Look at
He
that.
shows it being solidified and changing color.
Oh,
So
wow.
when Metatron's involved in it, he takes it from like it looks very flat, and then he's pulling that symbol out, and it's turning to like a dark purple from a white to a dark purple, and it's
Ooh,
rotating. It's rotating now. So what
very
Erik says
cool.
is when you're activated with Metatron, and he says that Metatron is the joining of, he says some people might think of it as the heavens to the earth, but it's the joining of the higher body, the higher self, the higher spirit to the mental realm, to the physical. So it's the process of grounding that to the earth, which he says creates a human being as a whole person, as a
Wow.
whole. Mm-hmm.
That is so cool.
It's really interesting.
Do geometry patterns or laws change on every dimension? Or are they sort of the same in each dimension, universe, etc.?
He says, think of consciousness growth and expansion. So it's like it's the difference of looking at a triangle as a flat, like one dimension, and then seeing it as a three-dimensional structure. So as
Okay.
we're moving, he says, yeah, then we're starting to expand. So it's a more expansive. He says, think of it as powering up would be the easiest way to say it. You power up as you move. It's got more
Oh,
information.
oh, so interesting. Is there a dimension where you can create your own geometry? Actually, can we create our own geometry here also?
Yes. He says, yes, of course. He says, within the structure that we already are, by using intention, and he says there's different ways that you can do that, whether you are, and he's giving me an example right now because I do spirit art for people, and a
Yeah,
lot of what I do is I connect to the higher self
yeah.
and create symbols and like geometry. So there's all different kinds of shapes, and what they have told me and what Erik is sharing right now is that each map is made up for that person in whatever they are attempting. So let's say this is to do with love, or this is to do with getting new employment. Those energies that they're staring at with their eyes are infusing the cells within the body and their auric structure.
Oh, wow.
So it allows that to solidify. So he says you can use it as a power, as an amplification. And he says you can create your own codes. And he says he recommends that everybody tries this and does it with their own intuition,
Ooh,
putting something together, following your own intuition. He says, and not worrying so much about, am I getting this right? Am I putting this line together correctly? He says, because your higher self will guide you to put a code together that is right for you.
that is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all right. On psilocybin trips, sometimes sacred geometry designs seem to come through for this person, I guess. I was wondering what that's all about.
Well, he says what this person is talking about is actually is coming from their own auric field.
Mhm.
So what they were seeing was their own soul blueprint.
Okay.
That's what they were looking
Wow.
at. He says you can also see this many times. Erik and I have talked about how to play with the phone to see orbs.
Yeah.
And he's just saying that a lot of people will get orbs and look in them, and there'll be geometric shapes.
Oh,
There'll
wow.
be all kinds of little patterns in it. And he says that's coming from the person that's doing the video, he says, or other people in the room
Oh,
from their chakra system.
wow.
So orbs are actually coming out, he says, because they have consciousness to them. And they're all within us. He says, think of the many layers of our own chakra
Oh,
system.
yeah.
And
So
we're teaching a chakra.
it's not always spirits like our deceased loved ones that are the orbs, right?
Yes. Deceased loved ones, ETs,
Yeah. But
he says
also comes from
our
us.
own system, it
Yeah.
comes from us. So he says like when you see that and you're seeing a lot of different shapes, he says you're actually seeing what your higher self, what your spirit blueprint, where it's at. He says you can read that, you can go in and actually he says everybody should try this. Put your cell phone on, put it on video in dim lighting, and he says ask your higher self to help you output your own auric field, your own chakra
Wow.
system. And he says, and watch and see what happens and play with that. He says, there's all kinds of ways to bring this information in.
Cool. You guys do that and then put in the comment which I never read, whatever. I have too many things to read. Put in the comments what the results were. Okay, let's ask a couple more questions before we pause and move on to part two.
Yeah,
Uh, all right, I think we've already done this, but can we ask about the 369 method for manifestation? Does it truly work? I think what the answer to that was yes, if you believe, if you're on that same frequency of, I already have that.
that's
It's
right.
already in my life, in my reality.
That's right. That's right, because Erik says the numbers themselves are a powerful vibration. And so when you amplify that with actions, so he's giving me an example with Tesla, because Tesla was very fascinated with the 369,
Yeah.
and he used that. He's showing me something I had read about Tesla a while ago, which was when he would have a meeting, he'd walk around the building 3 times before
Oh,
he'd
wow.
go in. He touched the door 6 times. Like he would use that pattern for everything to amplify it. And so Erik says, when you use those numbers with the understanding that they themselves have power, and then you take control of your own belief system, because yes, belief and our emotional energy amplifies as well, but he says it's about the continuation of doing it. So he says if you just do it once and say okay, it's going to do its thing, he says, well, how far are you vibrationally from that to actually happen?
Yeah.
What do you do in your day-to-day life that supports doing that? Because he says that's where the big gap can be, and where people be like, oh, that's just crap, that's just a load of
Yeah.
crap, it doesn't do anything. He says, so commit yourself to doing it. And he says, do 369 every day. He says, use those numbers every day, 3 times a day, 6 times a day, 9 times a day. And he says, and do it for 33 days. Do it for 66 days. He says, use the numbers.
Yeah.
And he's also saying, like, walking in a triangle. So, like,
Oh,
going for a walk and like mapping out a path that's in a triangle. He says there's all kinds of things that
it's
we can do.
limitless, truly
It is
limitless. And
limitless.
also, what about their tones that I see on YouTube, the 369 hertz tones? There's also the, 936 and the 63. I don't know if it makes any difference, whether it's in order or not. But would you recommend the 369 tone, playing that as you're meditating for manifestation?
Yes. Yes. And he also says putting those numbers, actually meditating on those numbers. So
Okay.
sitting and putting them in front of you. He says putting them inside of a triangle and putting them in front of you. And he says, and meditate on a feeling. So if you're bringing in more peace into your life,
Yeah.
he says, then sit and meditate on that sensation of peace,
Mm.
what gives you peace in your life currently, and use those numbers. And he says, and gaze into them. He's like saying, just like sun gazing, just gaze
Yeah.
right into them, because your everything in your body and your structure is picking up that energy and
Mm.
amplifying it.
Well, I've racked my brains on what I should try to manifest, but I feel like I have everything I want and need. So, Eric, any suggestions? I don't need anything else than what I already have. Or maybe I do and I just don't know it.
He says,
More
Mom,
brains.
he goes, and that's the exciting part about self exploration, is he says it doesn't have to be these things on the outside. What kind of experiences do you want? What kind of things would you like to experience? What kinds of emotions? What makes you feel excited? So he says an experience can be an experience with somebody else that you love. It can be the type of feeling that you get when you're with all the kids.
Mm,
He says, so think of in those terms. And he says,
okay.
and watch what kind of experiences come in for you.
All right. Well, I guess we should wait, there's one more before. Should we use sacred geometry or Metatron symbols for manifesting? So the answer to that was yes, right? And we could throw in the tone,
Yes,
the 369 tone. But
yes.
it has to be 369. It can't be another order of those numbers, like a 936 tone, right?
He says it just changes the direction. It changes the direction because he goes, even though creation is truly not linear, it
Yeah.
really isn't a linear process, but he says there's a belief system connected to it that it's amplified in that order.
Okay.
So he says if you change the order of it, it changes the amplification. But he goes again, what do you believe? He goes, do you believe putting 369 makes more sense? Because most people will say yes, and that will give you more power.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And you guys will put a little splash screen so you can get in touch with Michelle. Michelle, would you like to share anything about what you have to offer beside your awesome art
Yes,
and channel?
actually, so I've got another amazing medium that I work with, and she joins me on the Healing Heart channel on YouTube, and we do all kinds of different spiritual topics, and we call it Manifestation Mentorship Monday. Well, she and I have a new series of classes coming out, and so on the 25th of February, we're doing deep dive of chakras and energy. So, all of this kind of stuff, and really getting into the chakras and understanding how to do things yourself, how to remove blocks yourself, how to expand your own energy, how to heal your body, and to really take ownership. Eric's really helped with that empowerment, and that's what I really enjoy to do
Well,
is
I'd love for you
empower
guys
everyone.
to do a YouTube that I could put on my, or I can share that one. But
Yeah,
cool. Be sure you tell Paula, give her the
yes,
information, links and
I will.
stuff, so she can put it
I
up
will.
on the screen.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you guys. Be sure you subscribe because we're going to have part two of sacred geometry in 369. Bye.